London. All right, so we'll go ahead and get this started. We have a fairly small group, but that's all right. Everybody can hear me okay? Thumbs up? Yeah? Okay. All right. And people will trickle in as they normally do. Most folks know the drill by now. We just start off doing a couple of basic slides to get everybody acquainted here. Let's check that. All right. So welcome to week 6 here. Oops. Get this out of the way for you. All right, week 6. So we're going to do 90 minutes is the plan. I mean, the extra time is kind of, if you guys want to stick around, you can. We had planned for that because last week we had about 18 people on the call here, and they requested extra time after the discussions are done in the small groups, and folks wanted to be able to discuss in the larger group and debate a little bit if they could for an extra 30 minutes. Of course, looks like the group is a little smaller this week, kind of as expected. Hey, Tanish. And so if you, did you want to say
something?
Hey,
Kevin. Nothing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
No worries. So if you guys want to stick around, we'll be able to knock out a few articles of Dan's proposal for his constitution. And of course, we may be able to skip that last 30 minutes since we have just a small group this week. We are always encouraging folks. Again, this is going to be, we're coming into the last few weeks. I should say we're about halfway through this whole series with an ideal of presenting a few candidate constitutions maybe by December, possibly January. And so we're hoping folks will start to gather in these small working groups on their own, either start their own calls or start drafting their own articles that they would like to see changed. We have seen a lot of folks who are very dissatisfied with the current constitution, both version 1 that's in progress right now and also Dan's code is law. A lot of folks are saying there needs to be more robust language, so on and so forth. So folks who are very interested in actually drafting the wording, who want to have a strong say in what the candidate constitutions may look like for the community, we always encourage those folks to jump in and write their own articles and create their own groups of folks who would be interested in doing the same. So the links, I just posted in the EOS Alliance Telegram chat. We have the Dan's intent of code is law. Roman, hey man, welcome. Thank you for joining us. And so if you guys don't have that link, we can post it in the Zoom chat as well. And we're going to compare the last few articles of Dan's proposal, intent of code is law, with the current constitution. And just find the articles that he is sort of rewriting. They don't necessarily correlate number to number. Oftentimes he'll have number 8, for example, in his, maybe number 17 in the current constitution. So just find the matching article in the current constitution and then compare, see what's better, see what the community prefers, and then possibly find new wording for both. And then we'll also share community leader training. So if you want to be a facilitator, if you want to help run some of these calls and start your own groups to write new articles for consideration in a new constitution, then we will share the facilitated training call as well. So you can help organize those. Hang on 1 second. Let me try sharing this again. Okay, so this is a small group. So we'll just keep it to this small, instead of breaking out for now, we'll just keep it like this and we'll discuss. And here is the sequence of events we'll be looking at. In this group, we're just going to take a look at Dan's proposed constitution. We'll start with article number 7 in his proposed constitution, and we'll just all read it together. And then we'll ask ourselves a couple questions, which is the corresponding article in the version 1 constitution that he is trying to sort of rewrite, if you will. What is being compared, changed, and challenged by Mr. Larimer. And then if time's available, which I think it would be, we can discuss articles 8, 9, or even number 10 in his constitution. And then, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, we were going to have open discussions for folks with multiple groups coming together. Because this is a smaller group this week, we can skip that last 30 minutes if folks want, or we can just keep right on going and do multiple extra articles in the Dan's constitution if you guys wish. So let me share the link to Dan's proposal. I'm going to grab it for you guys. I'll put it in the Zoom chat just so everybody has it. Hi, Anna. Welcome. Thanks for joining. Good to see you. There's his constitution. And so everybody, if you could pull it up, in fact, I'll share my screen and we'll go down to his intent of Coda's law. So here we go. All right, so we will start off with number 7 here, which is fairly straightforward. This is Dan's intent of Coda's law proposal. A Ricardian contract is deemed accepted when a transaction is incorporated into the blockchain. Pretty straightforward. And I guess I'd like to go ahead and open up the floor to discussion from folks. And also would like to sort of get some feedback from you guys as to what you kind of compare this to in terms of the current constitution. Is there anything like this right now that basically says when the transaction is submitted to the blockchain that people are bound to the Ricardian contract? Does this language need to be expanded upon? What needs to be changed? So I'll open it up to you guys if anyone has something they'd like to say. And welcome, Well Friendly. This is a fairly straightforward article, and as Anna just said, straightforward as well. If anyone has anything to say about this particular article, if not, we can just go right to article number 8 in Dan's Constitution and dive in a little bit deeper. Leave it up to you guys. And feel free to speak up if you wish. You can unmute yourself. So,
I think we are fine with this.
pretty simple.
Yeah, pretty simple.
Okay, let's go to number 8, guys. Parties voluntarily consent for all other parties to permanently and irrevocably retain a copy, analyze, and distribute all broadcast transactions and derivative information. That's Article 8. I'll let you guys mull it over for just a moment. We may end up breaking out into groups here. We have 9 folks in here now. In fact, let's go ahead and do that. We'll make 2 breakout groups as you guys sit here and ponder Article number 8 in Dan's Constitution. So we'll do 2 breakout groups, and that way we can have 2 groups having separate discussions. And then when we come back together, we can see if the groups wound up on similar kind of ideas, if they had similar thoughts. And then we know if those thoughts are similar in the 2 groups, then obviously it's important to a lot of the community. So I'll go ahead and break the group up. Let me stop sharing for a moment. And would anyone like to be a facilitator? Anyone on this call? If you'd like to, you can speak up, or you can change your name with an F in it. I can help facilitate group number 1. And then, Tanish, are you comfortable facilitating? Have you done it before?
No, I don't think so.
No.
Yeah.
The main thing, and I'll go ahead and start the breakout rooms to give us 2 different groups to do discussions. But the main thing really with a facilitator, you're just helping move conversation along. You're not trying to kind of push the conversation in one way or the other, but you're just trying to ask the questions that will help continue the conversation. And of course, as a facilitator, you can include some of your own viewpoints to help keep the conversation going. Let's see. So we'll do group number 1. Oops, let's do this here. Recreate. Okay, so we'll look for, we'll go ahead and put Roman and Anna and Philip. Will you be participating as well in discussions today? Are you there? Okay, cool. So we'll put Roman, Philip, Anna, and Katie Roman in together in breakout room number 1. And actually, I'll join them with breakout number 2. Room number 2 would be Justin, Shane, Tanish, and myself. And what I'll do is I'll open the rooms. You guys should see a pop-up to go to your room. And start with Article 8 in Dan's Constitution, the one that we had just shared a second ago. Not the simple one that we skipped over, but Article number 8. And you should see the pop-up.
Hey. Hey, Katie. Hey, Roman.
Hello, guys. I was hoping to mostly lurk this time.
I was here to lurk as well.
we got caught.
Yeah. Oh, man. Let's see. Article 8. Pull this up. I know, Roman, you're facilitating. You said you're lurking. Did you want to read it?
This is Article 8 of the existing Constitution.
Of Dan's intent of code article.
All right, let me just DuckDuckGo, Dan Larimer, Constitution 2.0.
I think what's interesting too is doesn't block 1 have a version of this slightly different, but the same? Let's see.
I'll drop a link in the chat right here.
Perfect.
So Article 8 is the use of the blockchain constitute consent to its terms. There was some pretty bitter debate about this in the EOS Telegram channel.
At the blockchain, one of the notes is the blockchain shall constitute consent to its terms. So you are what was the debate, Roman?
Well, this was in the EOS group, which was a group of libertarian-minded folks from, completely no governance at all people to people who are just concerned that the Constitution isn't too heavy. And there were some people in the group who argued pretty strenuously that that by using a blockchain, you're not agreeing to anything. And they imagined that the only governance would be on the dApp layer when you choose to interact with an application. That's certainly, a nice project. It's not, the fact that there is sort of default level governance, in my view, is a white paper feature of EOS. So even Dan Larimer's lighter Constitution 2.0, which is much smaller than the launch Constitution, says that using the blockchain, you're consenting to its terms. What's our little group assignment right now?
I guess to analyze this and compare what where it is in B1 and how they differ, and what we feel is more efficient. I feel like it's kind of similar to B1, as in,
all right.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm here to learn. Like, we're signing our Cardian contract to interface with the dApp, in which we are agreeing to those terms, and that's on us. And I feel like that's also in B1.
Well, here's a link to the launch Constitution.
Yeah. This article is very straightforward. I feel like it doesn't really need much analyzing at all.
Yeah. Is there an equivalent, though, in the launch version? That's what I'm looking for now.
Would it be informed consent? Article 13.
All surface.
Or a liability? No, not a liability. Acceptance?
Yeah, I think it's 13 and 18.
It's pushing both of those into one, huh? Sorry, let me cut mine off.
Yeah, let me read that. Let me reread it slowly. Yeah, I think 13 says that if you build something for EOS, you have to make clear that if anybody uses the thing you've built, they are agreeing to the Constitution. I think Crypto Lions failed to do that for the rock, paper, scissors game, which we launched last week.
Nobody's gonna tell anybody.
It's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to lose something.
Yeah.
Lose something of value other than your ego.
So yeah, I feel like there's 3 in Article 1 that get to it. The first V1 that get to it. What stands out to me is V1 is much more explicit about how someone is consenting to the rules of the blockchain, whereas V2 is more, it's clear, director to the point. If you're interacting with it, you're consenting to using it, and abiding by its rules. So where V1 has, if you sign, if you send something, if you've consented to it, it's saying that action needs to be taken explicitly, and V2, it's not as explicit. So theoretically in V2, I could just have tokens sitting on the blockchain, never take action with them, and I'm still consenting to the rules of the blockchain.
Yep, I think that sounds right to me.
It's a fairly simple thing. Do you think the people of Frios would not be down for this one, huh?
Well, Frios spans a big variety of opinions. So I was expressing the most radical opinion, which was no default level governance at all. Everything is on the DApp level. So unless you interact with a DApp, then you're not consenting to anything, I guess. So if you're only using system contracts like sending tokens back and forth. But like I said, that's not necessarily the consensus in Frios. It's just the most radical view that was expressed.
Did he give us any other assignments on other?
We can skip ahead, right? We could.
Yeah. If Roman's okay with that.
Please go ahead.
Well, also, I forgot, we got to take notes on our consensus of thoughts for this, which helps them write their own version 3.
Do we have a facilitator that's taking notes, or is that a different person? It doesn't matter. I guess it could be anyone.
Since none of us were trained to be facilitators, I guess whoever wants to take notes.
I'll take the notes, I guess. I'll do it.
Thanks, Katie.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably the easiest thing we'll have to take notes on.
Well, Roman, what do you think about that? What do you like having, because you are very into helping the Constitution and voicing your opinions, and I always saw you as somebody that had deeper thought about it. And what do you think about the idea of it?
Honestly, well, I took a big step back from the Constitution stuff. I just want it resolved, and I want to just go back to building things. So I've sort of tuned out, which is why I wanted to lurk now and see what I've been missing, see what everyone else was talking about.
I think
So what I want is just resolution. It's I think all of them could work. Everyone is an experiment.
well, I have a question about that too, is since it's open source software and you have to agree to this constitution, what about those that don't know that they have to agree because they're just using the software and there's a language barrier or whatnot? Like I always wondered what happens then. Do people file on that new DApp that was created? And what if that DApp was like really, really successful, in which it could hurt EOS? So we're like, well, do we file or not? Because they're actually creating mass adoption,
Yeah, right, exactly. Of course, we've declared a lot of great principles, but when it comes to enforcing them, nobody wants to pull the trigger.
That's true. And then who do you pull the trigger to? I know that some people in the BP compliance group were like filing claims against people that didn't have reg producer agreements. But I mean, what then? I mean, I don't know. Like when you think of someone enforcing something, you kind of have to have some kind of healthy fear instilled. And there hasn't been any healthy fear from the beginning. And I don't see how you could gain that now, like with all the claims. There's still people in the top 21 with not adhering to the reg producer. And we don't know who they are, collecting, funds.
Yep.
There's a quote by Dan talking about how he doesn't want to put in a half-baked system on the EOS software. And I think we really had to think about, well, if the system now, before it's ratified or doesn't have funding or whatever, is not really working now, like how much more could it work? And then could dispute resolution even scale to help millions of people? And then how much more money would we have to pay to independent people that are named to help scale that? It's just kind of questions that I wonder, like we should think about, is this half-baked or not? And what are the possible outcomes or whatever? Because like you said, you just want to get to the part where you can build on it and everything's cool and we move on. And to be caught up in a constant turmoil of trying to do it a certain way and include certain people, or they're not right or corrupt, or voting them out, it just seems like a bunch of like busy work, really, and a waste of money.
Yeah, I'm with you. I guess I would like to see one of two things, and this might be my autism speaking, but I would like to see either we say that it's the law of the jungle, we're not enforcing these rules, or we keep the rules and figure out how to enforce them. The thing that bothers me is, having rules and not enforcing them. And yeah, maybe I'm taking things too literally. But yeah, I'd be fine either way. I'd be fine if we said there's no base governance. It's like I don't think that's what was in the white paper, but fine. Like just make the promise match the reality.
Yeah, I agree with you. For me, the thing is about this, like you said, with either we enforce the rules or we don't. We have rules or we don't. That's how I felt all along, and I still feel that way, because what happens is the good, honest people are going to follow rules that are in place. And if we aren't enforcing the rules, there's these people willingly following the rules that are in place. And then there's this group of people that aren't at all. And the group of people who should be punished for not following rules are in fact getting an advantage. Their, time, effort, not needing to be transparent, collecting more funds. So it's a situation where following the rules and trying to have integrity is hurting people. So in that case, it would be better to have no rules at all, right? But
yeah, I do think the cost of forks and sister chains is going to go way down. I think the cost of sister chains is already lower than most people realize. So I think 2019 will be the year of EOS sister chains.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting. Yeah, I mean, it's the best gift that Dan and Block One gave us, right? Making this open source. I think that was their exit strategy. If everything goes bad, we can all jump out of the plane with our parachute.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't know if that was like, hey, this is our exit strategy or whatever, but the inner blockchain communication technology is either way, it's going to help grow this parallel with each other and on top of each other. So you're right. Like if all else fails, people will jump onto forks and even be bot producers on multiple chains and whatnot. It's sad that we have to fork to get what we thought we were going to get, though. That's kind of sad to me.
You're right. It is sad.
But we move on, right? You gotta go. Like Roman can speak to this, and maybe even Philip. You know, like developers don't want to have to mess with this stuff. They just want to be able to use the software and create what they want. Like he was just saying with rock, paper, scissors, like if they were to, you know, get called out and file a claim on them because they came up with this idea and they forgot one little thing because that was the last thing on their mind because they could care less. They're more inspired. That could hinder a lot of people trying to just come and build.
One solution is to just broaden Dan's amendment number 8 and, or no, it's not even his amendment 8. I think it's maybe unrelated, but it's just to say, like, if you don't specify your own Ricardian contract, then all liability goes to you or something like that.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect, Roman.
So what for the next, what do I say? Roman?
Yes.
Is this pertaining to Article 8 or you said more broad? What did you just say?
Let's see. Well, okay. Number 8 of Dan Larimer's Constitution 2.0 is using the blockchain makes you agree to its terms.
Yes.
So meaning just the Constitution is in effect.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it's not related. It's a little bit of a tangent, but I was suggesting that if you do not specify a Ricardian contract in your DApp, then liability belongs to you, which for some kind of trivial game doesn't matter unless the game deals with real value, like a gambling game, in which case you want a good Ricardian contract.
Mm-hmm.
That even it kind of incentivates people to want to add it, because if they do add it, if you know, for V2, if they do add it, then they're not responsible at all for what happens as the developer. And then if they don't, then they're not able to fall back onto the Constitution for protection for that. So it's really a good catch-all.
Hey, have you guys been tracking the referendum? Is there a consensus, or is there a general feeling of when it will be active, when it will happen?
It was in the testnet, and then at the last minute, some of the people working on it, so there's dependencies. There's a bunch of different BPs working on it, and there's dependencies on each other's parts to make it happen. And at the last minute, one of them completely changed the dependencies. And then everybody was complaining that they wanted proxies involved, which for the first version, it was going to be, you know, you have to vote and not use proxies till they could get funding to redo it. But now that it's changed, now we have to rework part of the dependencies. And so it was in testing, and I think now it has to be go back to the drawing board. We'd love for you to jump in there if you want to. It's open. It was EOS Canada and EOS Nation and Grey Mask and Jenner EOS and EOS Tribe. And
yeah, I think HKEOS was working on it as well. Or no, he's working on the worker proposal.
Yeah, and then in that regard, the broker proposal system. But right before the hackathon, they completely changed how they were, how things were working. So it was a little crazy in there, and people are still in London. So.
What? Yeah, they just enabled on my EOS kit the ability for people to submit referendum and then people to review the referendum, and technically they could vote, but they're not encouraging anyone to do this. They were just trying to show that it could be an easy implementation to get referendum. But EOS Nation and Tribe and everything have been working on a really comprehensive, non-branded, so non-political tool that's going to have a lot more features. So EOS Asia officially wants people to wait for that. They just want to show that the functionality is there.
Also note, Roman, because I know that you like building a lot of tools, Gray Mass, I believe Asia, and I don't know for sure, I'll let Katie speak to that, but Generios and other toolkits or tool offerings are going to include the referendum vote from their wallets or tools. So it would they would use the same APIs to populate the same data and then allow people to vote on their platform if they wanted, or on the general platform.
Right, that I was aware of. Thanks.
I wonder, is there any thoughts overall about V2 since it's like the last of it?
It out too. I just think that the language is, written by a developer, so it might be harder for people that are not developers to understand how it relates, and discussing it and trying to understand what it means is really important. So I think these calls are really important, that we feel comfortable to ask questions, and what questions we might think are dumb or whatever, but I think it's really important that we explore this together. So I don't know.
I agree. It's, I know that V2 has caught the imagination of a lot of people I respect in the community. And so that's why I want to learn more about it. I think one of the strengths of V1 is just that they have two of, the guy who helped create it, Thomas Cox, is very vocal, and he's, he explains his intent and thought process constantly in Telegram behind each and every article. And while Dan is obviously very busy doing everything, I would love, as someone who's not a developer, for Dan to get on a call with the community and just answer some questions about V2 so that, even I could understand it better and then explain it better to the EOS Asia community, just because there are a lot of questions in V2 for me. But I believe in Dan, and I believe, that he has an idea of why he needs this to be a certain way to implement his vision. But I think we just need to hear from him.
I think that's a great idea. I know that could pose confliction with the creator is now jumping in, and I can understand why he might be a little hesitant to, because he's seen the dialogue.
If it's not legal, then I say stuff those people. I mean, they're like, Dan, give us all your knowledge and your dApps and your talent, but you're not allowed to have a say because we'll just murder you. That's ridiculous. It's terrible. I know you're not that way, Anna. I'm just saying that those people bother me. They just want Dan to shut up and work for them.
I could see both sides. People are frustrated. They had to, build voter portals or whatever. But I think that was a good challenge for the people that are devs. Were excited. I'm sure they were excited about the opportunity to build whatever they wanted and stuff like that. But if B1 has these goals that they can't talk about because they're really lofty goals that they're excited about and they need the Constitution to be a certain way, then I would definitely entertain what they're proposing and what the baseline of that is, because I want to be able to build the future that they see ahead, because this is their, their baby, and we're just trying to take care of it.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, the reason I came onto EOS and bought EOS is because of Dan, beginning and end of discussion for me. I mean, I saw what he did with Steam, then I learned about BitShares. I was like, this guy is way ahead of his time. So I'd want to help, I want to see what he has in store for EOS.
I agree. What do you think, Roman?
I agree. That's what first attracted me was Dan's track record.
Yes.
I don't know if this is too conspiratorial, but I've also heard people talking about the possibility that Dan is feigning more disagreement than actually exists, so that Block 1 can distance themselves from the chain and say that, look, it's not ours. We don't even want it this way. It's the community.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I like that idea. That's pretty interesting.
You know what? I could jump on that conspiracy train. Makes sense to me.
Within every conspiracy, there's an ounce of truth, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but of course, then Block 1 can never advocate for anything, because if they do, everyone will be just like, oh, you just want to disagree with us. We understand. We won't take you seriously.
That's true. Yeah. 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 The problem is right now we have a different whale than whales running the show, and we don't know if, AKA exchanges, and we don't know if they're benevolent or not. We'll see. I do like that within Werbly that they're appointing block producers. I like that. Yeah.
Could the idea of us wanting to have a bunch of sister chains and daughter chains and side chains and all this stuff, could the idea of wanting that be more of a reason to want a V1 or V2, because it's kind of a little more open than and a little less centralized than V1? I guess the reason I'm saying that, I'm not trying to put words in anyone's mouth. I'm just asking, like, we should be thinking about the future sister chains and not just what's happening right now.
Well, you could make the argument either way. Like, some sister chains will be more free, closer to Constitution V2. some sister chains, like the compliance chains, might be closer to V1 with a lot of strict governance so that they could be compliant with financial regulations and stuff like that. But as long as they're doing their Genesis distributions, it's not really competition for token holders, because token holders just win across the board. Although maybe it can be construed as competition if, I think Warbly dropped 40% of their tokens. So everyone's benefiting, but maybe a smaller share. However, I think it's just win-win mostly.
Has anyone ever thought about the possibility or opportunity to have a constitution that says you have to sign a constitution, but you can choose whether you want to sign V1 or V2, and then you're held to that constitution?
Wow, that would be fun.
I mean,
so if you want ECAF or centralization of that, then you signed V1 and then you can go through the proceedings of that. But if you sign V2, then you don't get the provisions of that V1 offers.
It raises some questions because conflicts can occur between people who sign different versions of the Constitution.
It would also challenge which one was more efficient, right? If one person had V1 and they're trying to like file claims, and the other person had V2 and they have no responsibility.
Yeah. Oh, I listened to that. That was great.
yeah. Well, and that was amazing to me, and it makes total sense when it seemed like he says it, but then you're like, oh yeah, that's common sense. We all deal with customer service in the real world, right? Like how many times we call a bank or our internet provider or something, and you're more frustrated that they just can't give you an answer in a timely manner than you know, at some point it's like, fine, keep my $80, just fix this. You just want an answer. Yeah, and that's human nature. That leads you to think about arbitration, how the average arbitration case lasts 1 to 2 years on average, which means there are some that are shorter. There are ones that go longer than that. Right now, we have people whose tokens have been frozen since the main chain launch. No cases have been ruled on yet, and that's on purpose because they build in timelines to allow people to respond to ECAF. And we also have to remember ECAF's not a thing yet. They're not legally bound yet, as I understood it, under any kind of law. They're just saying we're gonna form ourselves under the New York Convention standards of an arbitration forum, but that still has to go through, right? Does anyone know?
Well, I don't know what you mean by go through, but I don't think there's a formal process unless it's challenged in court. I think they're just trying to follow it. So like if a country recognizes the New York agreement, they will also have to recognize the decision of EOS arbitration. But I think the question is open legally until somebody challenges it. I don't think it's like you apply for recognition.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I'm not being very clear. That this isn't gonna, because I know a lot of people we want immunity from corrosive government forces, but we don't know yet if this gives us immunity. So right now we have frozen tokens that someone could decide to take legal action against ECAP or any of the BPs, and we'd have to take it to court, right? I'm in the US, so I'm just thinking about US law. And there's an argument there to be made that even one BP could be held liable for these tokens being frozen because it takes 21 out of 21 of the BPs to blacklist.
Yeah, that's an important question, Katie. I don't know. Anybody?
It's a really good question, Katie.
It's a legal argument I've heard by people who are very frustrated right now and are meeting with attorneys. And it's part of the scary part of it, right? Is we're in untested, uncharted waters. The chain is untested. I feel like we can't get too smug and think, yeah, we can, oh, we're just making our own rules here that we're all consent to, and outside gov is not going to step in. I mean, it happens in blockchain all the time.
The last thing we really want is a bunch of governments from other countries looking at EOS.io and saying, what are you guys stealing from people?
Yeah.
We have the 30 seconds warning to get back to the main room. Shall we?
Let's go.
Thanks,
All right.
guys.
Thank you, everyone.
And here they all come. It's Katie and Roman and Anna. Welcome back, guys.
Hey, Kevin.
All right. Hey, Anna. You guys want to go first? We'll let you guys go first if you'd like.
Roman was facilitator and Katie took notes.
Yeah. Roman, do you want to speak or?
Please just go from your notes if that's okay.
Sure. Okay, so we spoke about Article 8. Use of blockchain shall constitute consent to its terms. We found this to be pretty direct and explicit. If you have coins sitting on the blockchain, you consent to its use and rules. Found the closest comparisons in V1s to be Articles 12 and 13. We found V1 to be more detailed in what actions would be consent to the Constitution, such as signing a transaction, sending tokens, etc. It was noted that the EOS group thinks there should be no base layer arbitration and thinks that consent can only happen on the DApp layer, which means that if you're using protocol level actions, you're not consenting to anything. You'd have to consent to a kind of terms of use on the DApp layer. Because Article 8 was so to the point for us, we moved on to look at Article 9. This constitution may be amended by a vote of the EOS token holders that attracts no less than 15% staked vote participation among tokens and no fewer than 10% more yes votes than no votes sustained for 30 continuous days with a 120-day period. We find this to also be really direct. We didn't really talk about it that much, except that it's clear and explicit. So then we ended up talking about things in general. We spoke about sister chains, daughters chains, Telos and Warbly, and how we're going to test these different governance models on these different chains. We spoke about Dan's vision and if he has plans in the future for what he wants to do with the EOS.io software. And since we found this constitution to be written, we know it's written by a dev. We assume that it's written then from a dev's perspective. We wonder if there's a reason why he wants such a stripped down constitution in order to maybe implement his vision. And we talked about conspiracy theories that B1 maybe is trying to hold all this governance stuff at arm's length and create more of a drama in the community to prove that they are not running the blockchain. And we talked about our hopes and dreams for the chain. We more just talked it up, right, guys? I mean, these two articles were pretty straightforward.
That's funny. I when you guys were in your group for a little longer, I assumed you guys were having incredible intellectual discussion. So no doubt you clearly were. Good stuff. Yeah, and go ahead. Oh, okay. We looked at Dan's version and then compared it to the Block 1 version that came out a day later. There are some changes, and that's part of what we talked about. If you look at Dan's version of the code, so I'll go through the notes here. So Dan's version has 10 articles, and the Block 1 version has 9. And the first question that Perry had and brought up, and it came up for us as well when we looked back at the original version. When you look at Article 12, as you mentioned, Katie, versus Block 1's Article 9, or no, Article 8, sorry, which is the same as Dan's Article, I think it's Article 8 as well. No, he's Article 9. Yeah, so it gets confusing when you look at the actual numbers. But the long story short is that in Article 12, publishing of the current Constitution, it says members may only publish information to the blockchain that is within their right to publish. And the Block 1 version took that out entirely. And that goes back to the argument that Perry said is important in terms of we need to decide, first of all, do we want this to be a subjective blockchain where there can be lots of arbitration cases, people trying to decide was this intended or not, or do we just keep this as objective as possible? And the entire group pretty much agreed that we want to keep it objective. We err on the side of what Dan was saying because we don't want lots of arbitration cases. We want the protocol level to be as light as possible. I don't know if we fully talked about FRIOS, which is an interesting case, but certainly a very lightweight kind of constitution that clearly defines terms, but also defines terms, but doesn't make it too heavy. Doesn't make it too hard to understand for everybody involved. And that goes back also to the language of counterparts, which came up in, let's see here, reading my notes. The counterparts was edited out of the Block 1 version, but it was actually in Dan's original version. And the counterparts language is also in, it's Article 19 of the current Constitution. And I'll paste it into the chat in Zoom here so you guys can read it. This is from the version 1 Constitution. And so Dan kept this language in his version, and then the Block 1 version that came out the next day, they got rid of this entire section. And we were kind of talking about whether they were referring, this counterpart section is referring to side chains, whether it's sister chains or daughter chains, whatever you want to call them, whether it's actual forks. Clearly Block 1, the way they put it, they just kept it down to the very simple, to the point article that you guys said, use of the blockchain shall constitute consent to its terms. And very straightforward. I guess they're saying that basically every chain will have its own constitution, I suppose, that will then refer back as well. So we kind of agree. We didn't make it all the way to Article 9 like you guys did, but that was the extent of what we talked about. And really the overarching theme for us was that we agree this needs to be kept objective and try to eliminate or at least reduce a lot of the very wet kind of activity that can take place when you have subjective type language in a constitution. Same thing with the glossary of terms. We've talked about a little bit more about, and I think it was Justin who brought this up, about having a glossary so that everybody understands the language that's being used, and therefore there would be no subjective cases in arbitration, if there is even arbitration, where people can make an argument as to the understanding of certain articles. So that's pretty much what we talked about. And yeah, and welcome Brandon as well. Good to see you hop in here. So we can open the floor. You guys can stick around if you want. We can have just kind of a free-flowing conversation. Last week, this was kind of hoped for. It was recommended by folks in the call. We had 3 groups last week. As I said at the beginning of this call, we expected it to be a little smaller. Folks are in London or in traveling right now at the incredible London meetup. I'm sure maybe even some of you guys are there right now. But yeah, any thoughts from you guys? The floor is open. You can either raise your hand or just go ahead and start talking. And the raise your hand feature is if you pull up your managed participants. Wait, no, where is that? Anyway, go ahead and start talking if you'd like to bring up a point.
Yeah, I just wanted to, this is Brandon. I just wanted to, first of all, say thanks for doing this and for everybody anybody to come on. I was talking with Thomas Cox, I believe it was last night. We were discussing the need to start making it a matter of academics, creating a kind of a best practices on referenda, and that the alliance would, once those best practices are kind of established by the community, that the alliance would be glad to kind of champion those a little bit and distribute that. So I just wanted to report to you guys that we have started kind of recruiting, getting together a group to specifically deal not with drafting referenda, but with creating a best practices on how language should be handled when drafting a referendum. Specifically, should referendums be binary? Should they not be binary? If they're not, just a simple yes, no. How do you handle kind of the gaming that can happen, vote gaming, and that sort of thing? So we're kind of looking at that from all sides, especially with a game theory approach to try and provide the community with some best practices on exactly how to write good referenda that can't be gamed. So we'll keep you posted on that as we go. I think right now we're just kind of at the phase just trying to find some people who are interested in helping out with that. So
I'm interested in that. Tell me where to contact you.
Okay, Perry. There is a Telegram group that's called, let me find it.
Looks like Justin just looked up.
Ballot Craft, I think is what they call it. Ballot writing group. Let me see if I can add you. I don't know if I'm an admin or not.
It looks like Justin he added the link to the chat here. Ballot Craft.
Oh, sweet. There you go.
He's fast.
Justin, thank you. So yeah, anybody who's interested, feel free on joining that. I think that there's up to like 22 people in it, which is way more people than we need to actually create the actual documents. But when it comes to discussions, we would really like to have as many brains in there as possible. This is the sort of thing that, when there's big ballot initiatives here in the United States anyway, when some states allow ballots to have referenda on them at the state level for individuals to vote on, and that the language that goes into those is there's a lot of gaming back and forth between different entities and that sort of thing, and it's not as simple as just saying, hey, should we do this, yes or no. Lawyers, there's lawyers that specialize in, I guess you could call it ballot craft. So we're going to do our best to pull that together. So thanks. Yeah, I appreciate letting me kind of recruit here.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I'm signed up. Thank you. Can I
Thanks.
ask you're welcome. Can I ask another question, Kevin?
Yeah, go for it.
When I first came in, as I mentioned before, I was watching the other room, and I noticed that they kind of had the opposite. Well, they had a particular view on the Constitution and the scope of the Constitution, similar to the comments that I came in when I entered your room late. And as I discovered, you guys were all very much in agreement with what I said, which is let's keep the Constitution to the base layer, and not address the DAP layers. What I was hearing in the other room, which got me to join the chat in the first place, was the opposite, or I perceived it to be the opposite. And I think it was what Roman was saying. And he was, I'm not, and Roman, please correct me if I'm wrong. But it sounded like you were saying the opposite, that we should extend it beyond the DAP layer, or beyond the base layer into the DAPs, the scope of what we're talking about right now. So I think this is, to reiterate what I said in the private room, in the breakout room, I think it's important that we get a common understanding of what the scope of what we're talking about. So are we talking about one constitution that rules them all the way vertically and horizontally through every DAP, all the way to the very end of a transaction, as if this constitution is going to deal with a package delivered on somebody's front doorstep, or not? Or are we only going to deal with those issues having to do with the Ricardian contract and the intent of law? And that's it. And so I think framing the question in that is really the step one. And until we're all agreeing on what we're talking about, there's really very little point about talking about the details, because they're all dependent on the greater context of the question. So Roman, if you could kind of help us understand what you learned from Frios, or what you liked from it, from you didn't like, and then maybe we can kind of help understand each other.
Well, I was pretty neutral. I was simply describing some of the debates taking place on the Frios channel, which is a community of libertarian-minded EOS community members, all the way from the radical anarcho-capitalists to people who just want a little bit less. So I'm neutral. The debate that took place was whether there should be default level governance at all.
Okay.
I think you're speaking to whether the Constitution goes into whether it rules DApps or whether it just rules situations that are not covered by DApps. My understanding was that DApp can have its own agreement, which is more important than the Constitution if it declares itself to be so. Maybe I'm wrong.
You're asking me? I don't have the answer.
I don't understand why we can't have a constitution that does both, right? That it has clauses within the Constitution that limit themselves to the base layer. And we have other clauses in the Constitution that limit themselves to just the DApp layer, and vice versa, or also clauses that extend to both, right? We have these two camps of base layer, non-base layer, or base layer, DApp layer, code layer, DApp layer, I should say. I don't understand why we can't discuss and cherry pick the best of both to create a constitution that governs both, but governs both layers maybe differently.
Okay, I can respond to that. I would say the strongest argument is enforcement. It's very, very difficult to enforce something at the DApp layer from the base layer unless we're censoring and getting into and intervening, and we're getting into all of that business, which now becomes a violation of our desired decentralization.
Well, that's kind of my point, I guess, Perry, is that if we specifically have clauses that are meant to govern the DApp layer alone, then those clauses, whether or not they're enforceable or not, or rather the lack of enforcement of those clauses on the DApp layer does not interfere with the right to enforce on the base layer. Right? If we break those two out within the Constitution, maybe the DApp layer clauses then become easier to amend in the future when we say that they don't, or when we see that they don't work, without impacting any of the governance and the enforceability of the base layer.
Well, I'm not sure if that is in conflict with what I'm saying or support, to be honest. I guess all I'm saying,
okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
If we can't enforce it, then I don't think it's really worth putting in our Constitution, because the only other avenue is a manual enforcement, right, or an intervention, an enforcement by intervention, rather than something that's in code, that's in open source code that can be deterministic, right? So if we can't enforce it, I don't think it should be in the Constitution. And I think that gravity, that tendency, is what Dan is trying to suggest, is that let's just keep it to what we expect to be the intent of code. It won't be perfect, but if we write out a Ricardian contract that at least tries to bridge that gap between human and machine, between the computer code itself and our human understanding, because we're all humans, let's just keep it right there. Let's focus everything right there, and that's the arbitration. That's the scope of the Constitution, and if we can enforce it, then we enforce it, and if not,
well, there's
right?
I think we get caught up on this concept of enforcement, and I think that what you're looking at is just legal enforcement, right? When in reality, there's 4 constraints on human actions in these networks. We have legal enforcement, like what you're talking about. There's code that enforces things, but there's also social enforcement and market enforcement, right? So the community still has a mechanism by which they can. I look at nation states that are built on constitutional models, and we would be silly to say that every single aspect of their constitution is 100% reflective of the society that they live in. Right? That would be silly to say. However, the Constitution ends up being not just a legal statement, but a moral statement through which individuals can exert social pressure and market pressure and have that constitution there as the standard that they're exerting that pressure on. So just removing it because it can't be enforced legally may be throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because if we put the standard in there of the Constitution, there's still other avenues that EOS token holders can take besides just arbitration. Right? They have social pressures and legal pressures that are there. It also becomes a statement of this is the behavior that we as a society expect. So now the question becomes, Perry, and I think this is what you're getting at, is that appropriate to put into a constitution? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I think that there's room for it, given that anything we put in the Constitution has the potential of becoming unenforceable in the future, depending on how society arranges itself.
Would the social or the market forces involve any resources from the EOS network?
We should also, there's been some chat, and I think Anna had a point as well. Anna?
Oh, I don't mean to cut off Perry. I enjoy listening to him talk about this with Brendan. I was just going to say, we had discussed in our group that if a DAP comes out and the DAP does not include the Constitution or accordion contract, but this DAP actually creates mass adoption, and along with Perry's point of, if there's no enforcement on a rule, then what's the point of the rule? So we were discussing, if there's people that are playing by the rules and yet they are not not benefiting from that, while others don't play by the rules and they benefit from that. How are you going to, how do we get to the point in which ADAP is bringing us mass adoption, and yet we try to, file claims against them because they didn't include the accordion contract or the Constitution to be agreed to? It's just, and then also as a developer, the last thing you're going to think about is including that.
Come here.
You're going to be more about building what you're inspired to build and having that be done than worrying about the rules that you had to add in there. So how would we even approach that with ADAP? And would we want to, if they're creating mass adoption, would we want to shut them down?
Yeah, and we should also, Justin, who has mostly been typing in chat, he hasn't been able to speak much, but he brought up he calls it a bad corollary, but internet. He's saying the internet doesn't tell Facebook how to govern itself, does it?
Come here. Good girl.
Britt, I think you're talking to your dog, maybe. I'll put you on mute there.
Oh, I'm terribly sorry, guys. I'm going to mute.
That's all right. No worries. So yeah, and also, Anna, you mentioned the code of engagement, referring to what Brandon, I think, was saying, instead of calling it a constitution, but more of a code of engagement. I think that's what you're getting at, right?
Yeah, I mean, if the future is looking towards, a B1 wallet that has identity linked to it, and then a reputation score and all of these things, then we could actually be upheld towards following a code of engagement by reputation. But right now, we're filing against people that are not agreeing to constitutions or reg producer agreements and stuff. And like Perry had mentioned, at some point, it's going to be a lot of time wasted chasing things and a lot of money spent with all of these disputes. And then when you have millions of people more than millions of people adopting this, then how do you chase each dispute? And then how much money is actually wasted on little disputes over things that people feel they are violated and whatnot, instead of just letting developers and dApps be responsible and moving on and allowing the freeway to be, you know, a 10-lane freeway instead of a 2-lane freeway with tolls.
I agree with that. And is it okay, Anna, if I build on that a little bit?
Please do.
Okay. My thing, and we can only go by, we only have 3 things to go on in this wild west of blockchain. Other blockchains, how they work, other depost blockchains, which I think a lot of us have interacted with, even though there's only a handful, and what's happening in the EOS mainnet right now. And what do we see happen on the EOS mainnet right now, right? A lot, we've seen ECAP do great work freezing funds that have been, that are, you know, been scammed or stolen, and that's been great. But we've also seen, as of now, they have an overwhelming casework. No case has been closed. Arbitration can take, on average, a year or 2. We know from speaking to watching Colin Rule's video, people like things to be resolved within 7 days. So we know there's a lot of work to be done there. We also know that EOS Bet is the most popular dApp on the mainnet right now, and they had their code closed sourced, which is in violation of the Constitution. No one moved to file against them for that. Parts of their code, I believe, still remain closed source. And there was a hack that was involved that maybe could or could not have been caught the faulty code if it was open source. EOS Bet, I think, is the one that lost those funds, though. I don't know if it affected any players directly. But so the thing is, right now, we have a toothless V1. It's done some work, but not much. And what happens is so a dApp developer that maybe want to make something like EOS Bet but said, oh, but it has to be open source. I don't have the time, money, resources to protect an open source product and really make it go. So I'm not going to create that dApp, because they're playing by the rules, are punished by our current Constitution without enforcement. Whereas a developer said, I'm going to develop this and I'm going to close source it, I don't give an F, is rewarded. They're making a lot of money. This is nothing against EOS Bet. It's just a reality of the situation. So my concern is, when we make rules for a Constitution and we're not going to enforce those rules, who do we end up, keeping on the sidelines of our community? People with integrity, people that you want to bring into the community. So that's why I'm starting to believe that perhaps a slimmed down Constitution is the way to go. I mean, just because we're just totally over our heads enforcement wise now, it's not happening, and I don't see it trending that way either. We're going to have, I'm rambling now, but we're going to have referendum. It's 1 token, 1 vote. Where are all those tokens right now, right? What are the tokens we see voting currently? Something to think about, I think.
Yeah, and if anyone is free to speak up here as well. And it sounds like, Katie, you've been changing your mind as you've seen the mainnet, the way it's been acting. So you're saying you were more objective before. You were saying that less is better, less kind of arbitration and so on. And now you're leaning more on the side of there needs to be more enforcement, and therefore maybe we need to write a constitution that fits to that.
I think I'm more just, I could go either way on it. I'm just feeling that, making all these rules without a realistic brand for enforcement sidelines good actors is what I'm seeing. Because good actors will voluntarily comply to rules and therefore won't be able to take advantage of some of the financial gains or community gains or, accumulating wealth or power in this ecosystem, which is an ecosystem that's not 1 person, 1 vote. It's 1 token, 1 vote. And so either we go full hog and make these really great rules, but then we need to enforce them like it needs to have teeth, or we have fewer rules to open up so that dApp developer could say, oh, it can be open sourced, it could be closed source, so I'm going to build my dApp, right? He's not like, I'm not going to build it because I don't have the resources to have an open source dApp and defend it. Someone's just going to steal it with me with more money, right?
Instead, it's like the DApp developer that's willing to say, I don't care that they say I have to open source, I'm going to keep it closed source, who is gaining money right now.
I think what Brandon was saying earlier is very interesting to me, because what I think I heard was an expression of values. What you wanted to include are values, and I think values are extremely important, because ultimately those guide the Constitution itself. Like, what are our values? But I think we need to make a distinction between our values somehow, and I don't know exactly how that would manifest, but somehow we need to make a distinction between our values and the things that we put in that we believe are going to actually define the mechanics of the chain. How is it actually going to work? And so you mentioned that code can enforce, markets can enforce, social can enforce, and I think there was one other. But
it said
let
legal,
me ask,
legal, which is what we're talking about.
Exactly. You're exactly right. You zeroed in on it. I was focusing on the legal. You're exactly right. I wasn't really even thinking about social or market.
Now,
but
ideally, you create a system where those are all aligned, right? Sorry.
Let me just ask one question, Brandon, of you.
Yeah.
Either of those, which of those takes resources from the EOS chain? Of the marketing or the social?
So I'm a little confused with the question, because I don't know what it means to take resources from the chain.
How would those manifest in the chain? I mean, would we give like a rating system, a social rating system, and people could like punish people?
Well, I mean, that's the social side, right? That already exists.
Have you seen those experiments where they hook people up to a false victim who's screaming electricity, who's running through their body, and the actual subject of the psychology experiments continues to give them the electricity, right?
Yeah.
So,
built-in reputation engine. The fact that that we are all talking to each other right now off the network allows us to start embedding our social dynamics onto the network, right? And how we interact with each other. If I suddenly have a deal with Kevin to sell him something in real life, and he agrees to send me some EOS, and I receive the amount of EOS that I thought I was going to receive, or I don't receive it, I have a pretty good idea of who Kevin, or that account that just sent it to me is Kevin, right? And it's not because the network is telling me that that's Kevin. It's because I interacted with Kevin in actual real life, and we're using the network as a tool to facilitate our natural relationship. Okay, so if we're talking about how do we turn the network into our natural relationship, I don't have an answer for that. I look at the network as a mechanism to enhance the natural business relationships that we already have, and that requires a degree of due diligence on the part of the individuals that are interacting. In order for social pressures to be social pressures, we have to build an actual society where people are interacting with each other, right?
Okay, so I think you sold me on the idea that we need values in our Constitution somehow.
I'm actually not arguing that we do need them. I'm arguing that there is a role for them, but I'm not arguing that I can be convinced to have a completely objective, valueless Constitution. So, but there may be a role for them, because legal and code are not the only two mechanisms to control human behavior or to influence human behavior.
Like, for example, the value that with shall not put violence on another.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That value. That's not code, but that's clearly a value. Should that be part of the Constitution? I mean, I don't know the answer to that.
Well,
that's an interesting question.
So those who are well versed in like anarcho-capitalist philosophy realize how deep of a statement that is. And I think that when that was first put in there, that was first put in there specifically to try and inoculate EOS from any recourse at the court level, at the state level. Because courts, by virtue of their existence and the way, or by virtue of their enforcement mechanism, depend on violence, right? If you take somebody to court, they don't comply with the court's ruling, men with guns show up. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So that was initially put into this Constitution as a very anarcho-capitalist type. If you recall the early days when Roman was involved in this debate pretty heavily, adding the any or language, something referencing lawful activity or something like that. And Dan pushed back hard against that. It's because it conflicted 100% with the statement of no violence, right? So even when you start making value statements in here, it does get very deep very quickly to some individuals compared to others.
Yeah, it's a slippery slope. When the moment you reference anything legal, then you say, okay, well, whose system? Which one? Which jurisdiction?
Yeah, that's.
Let me. Oh, go ahead, Kevin.
I was going to say we're scheduled for about 6 more minutes here, and I'd like for us to be able to have a couple takeaways from this discussion, from all these discussions. So I'd like to sort of bring out maybe 2 questions to the chat, and we can get an informal poll of the group that we have here. We have a very engaged group, and as Brandon was saying, we all kind of know each other at this point. So, and I need some help from you guys in terms of what the question would be. Are we talking about should the Constitution be, or should it have an enforceable type of action in it right now? Should there be something that dictates this is how the rules are and here's how they'll be enforced? Or, and I guess that should be the yes or no question, right? Is there a way that we can phrase that better? And if not, then we should open the question to the chat and we can get kind of a poll as to what people think about the question.
Can you write the question out, please, in the chat?
Yeah, let me write it out here, and I'll let you guys discuss as I write here. Just a moment. And as I type, just what I'm getting at here, should the Constitution have enforceable actions, or should it be more of a code of engagement? And so I'm just going to leave it as a yes or no question. So I'm just going to leave it as, should the Constitution have enforceable actions with a body labeled to enforce them? And it's just
I actually don't have access to the chat on the mobile app, or I might. I just don't know how to pull it up. But
how do you vote, Brett? I'll type it in for you.
Well, I'm actually going to add some complexity to that question. Like, it's actually very semantic for me. If you're going to call it a constitution, I'm going to think one way. But if the document says, code of engagement, I will think another way. So
I guess that's the question. Should we rewrite a constitution, or is it more code?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. That's actually something that I've thought about a lot. If using a using the nation state as an analogy for what we're building, if that's just totally the wrong thing to do or not. And
yeah, and I think it is. If we're calling it a constitution, then there isn't, as far as I know, an analogous structure with an existing nation state that has things in their constitution that they don't enforce, but just have for some moral guidance. I'm not aware of any civilization at all that has something like that and calls it a constitution.
Yeah, and if you can put your answers there in the chat. The question is, should the Constitution have enforceable actions with a body labeled to enforce them? We have a couple of yeses so far. I'll give you guys about 30 seconds. And Britt, if you could sort of phrase your answer again, please, for the chat.
And I know in this discussion, I made a lot of arguments for normative statements and value statements, and I do want to be clear that I'm not necessarily in that camp, but I'm thinking about that camp and trying to understand the role that could play. I'm not sure where I stand on this yet.
And we're seeing a lot of support well from what June said. Oh, go ahead, Britt.
Sure. So for my answer, if it is indeed a constitution, I think enforceability is key.
Okay, I got you. And June, can you describe what you're saying a little bit further, since it looks like a lot of folks are agreeing with what you're saying? And you're on mute right now if you're talking.
Hey, sure. It's essentially the version 2 of the Constitution, and after kind of reading it a few times, I finally kind of got to understand it a little bit better about what the scope of the Constitution was about, and it really made me think that, yeah, that's probably the best way to go, because really all of these actions are very difficult to enforce, and it creates, a lot of bureaucracy if you needed to, and a lot of delays on the blockchain if you had to reverse transactions or change transactions. So it's really mainly narrowing the scope to just a very limited kind of power to the block producers, which is if there's a bug in the code that's outside of what is stated in the Ricardian, and all you had to do is compare the Ricardian to the code, and if there's some discrepancy, you can say, okay, there's something there, and you allow the block producers to fix those differences. And then aside from that, there's no restitution, nothing about theft, nothing about anything subjective, no evidence or anything like that. So once you narrow the scope to that, it seems much more manageable for block producers. That was my biggest worry, that block producers would have this enormous burden on them and responsibility. But when you really narrow it down to code fixes, it's really essentially what they probably need to do anyways, as dApps have to upgrade occasionally anyways. So I am far more comfortable that that's manageable, and it limits the potential for huge bureaucracies and this kind of these disputes about dispute resolution, the process, and the subjective manner, which is just opens up a whole, that just creates enormous problems, I think. So that's why I felt like after a while, after reading a few times, I felt, okay, this is probably, I'm getting a better understanding of what this is. At least that's my interpretation, and I agree with it as well. So anyways.
Thanks, June. Yeah, and we're running low on time. Said we'd wrap it up within 90 minutes. So for those of you who are looking to write articles or a constitution, if you're looking to gather a group, you have kind of a little bit of consent. You have a consensus here in this small group, right? What June said seems to have a lot of support. And so if you're looking to write articles that would gain support from the community in general, you kind of know the direction that you should probably go in general. Whether your language, however your language turns out and everything else, you kind of know the overarching theme, right? And so that would be kind of my final word. And anyone else that has final words, feel free to speak up.
Thank you, Kevin.
I agree. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, please.
I was just thanking Kevin.
Sure. Thanks, Roman. And Perry, did you have something to say?
I was just going to say that I agree with what June has said, and that from my own perspective, the reason why I gravitate towards this minimalist view, for the number of reasons, but if for nothing else, we won't be able to scale unless we absolutely make the base layer the most efficient, clean, frictionless thing that we possibly can. Because scalability is really the main thing that is distinguishing us from the crowd. And so that has to be scalable. We can get richer constitutions, richer environments, richer arbitration, richer everything at another level But at this level, we have to really focus on, we really have to have a minimalist view, so to speak. And I think it goes not only through the code, but through the Constitution as well. If we can share that value, I think we can go to the next level, which is then we will have created a table. We'll have set the table for DApps, and they will feel comfortable to sitting down. And I think that's what they're waiting for, is something stable, sure, predictable, deterministic as possible. Never 100%, but as possible. Thank you.
Yeah, well said, Perry. And you have support from Philip as well in the chat. Well said. So yeah, thank you guys very much. This has been a great conversation. I feel like we have some good takeaways here. And I will, as always, if you have any kind of links you'd like shared on EOS Alliance, we offer a form. I'll put the link in the chat, but it's a form that you can, if you send the link to your item and it's EOS Alliance related, we'll help share it on all of our website and everywhere else as well. Or you can just contact me on Telegram. You know where to find me as well. But yeah, thank you guys very much. It's been a great conversation, and I look forward to talking to you guys more. And have a good one. Good night, good morning, wherever you are.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you. Bye-bye.